Hi there! So if you've been following me for a while, you might have seen me post and kind of put on my story about my elusive book. And I don't think I've ever really shared much about it. I think I've shared some of the milestones of the journey so far. So being part of this amazing writing container with some fantastic women, outlining our books, and then getting my amazing book agent, the process of writing the initial proposal and like the first 4 chapters and sharing that with publishers. I might have shared some of those highlights and tidbits over the last 2-3 years, but I don't think I've actually sat and told you what this book is about and why I even wanted to write it at all. I think I've told you the title. It's called Othered: How to Thrive in the World Not Created for You. But I want to tell you why I wanted to write this and what it's really all about. But I'm going to tell you about this in a very categorical way by sharing what's probably the most powerful statement I've ever heard in my life, but also probably the most deeply painful statement I've ever heard in my life. It was when I was a kid. I was being bullied quite severely at the time. And I remember someone saying to me, you're the common denominator in your life. And at the time, I think I'd just been beaten up by a bunch of people at school, so it was not well received. It was very painful to me. But actually, then I would run with this idea for a long time, and I realised it had some power. If you're the common denominator in your whole life, you can take radical accountability. And I think I'd fall into that school of camp. I'd read Stoic philosophy, I'd get obsessed by it, and I'd run my life like that. Never catch yourself complaining. You got to work hard, but harder than competition. You got to master your craft. And I think all those ideas are great, but one of the key wisdoms that I now have on that reflection and that journey of life, not being a kid anymore, is those ideas only go so far. All ideas have limits. And that's kind of what would birth my idea of my book, how to thrive in a world not created for you. Because for anyone who's felt othered, maybe, I don't know, you're neurodivergent like me, like I'm autistic, I'm dyslexic, lots of other things, or you're queer, or whatever reason, like you felt othered. And I guess othered is like you feel different, divergent from the norm of the society. And each society, every system has a norm, because just look at the research. For example, healthcare is a very good example for this. So you'll know in healthcare, they tend to do all the tests on men. We know this from that amazing book. I can't remember the author's name now. That kind of says, seatbelts were tested for men. All these things in history and society are tested for men. And we see this because, the systems have, maybe it's a consequence of a system. Let's say you're trying to get funding as a researcher, and actually they only give you X amount of funding and you want to have X amount of outcome. And it's cheaper to test on men because you don't have to factor their cycles, premenopause, postmenopause, all those kind of other factors. So you can just test on men, don't have to look at any of that other data, which means you don't have to have a much volume of subject matter subject people to test in your cohort of your lab testing or whatever. So it makes it easier. But this ease doesn't help the woman who's maybe applying a medication that hasn't been tested for her. And I think this is kind of what systems are like. They have all these kind of things built in for whatever reason or the other. And if you're other to that, nothing's been tested for you. It hasn't been vetted for you. And when you try and live in that way, sometimes it doesn't work for you. And you feel pain, and you might try and even apply these Stoic ideas, and you might just be harming yourself, like, taking radical responsibility when, someone has harmed you, rather than, putting frameworks in place, other frameworks in place. And that's kind of why I wanted to write this book. because I wanted to explore all these other ideas, all these other schools of thought, all these other philosophies, and not in a high fluty way, but in a practical way. Like Stoicism, you might want to apply that idea, but where does that idea take you? And not necessarily explore it through the lens of saying, this is Stoic philosophy, but more like, where does that apply for you as a person? So maybe one way I explore this in like the second part of my book is where I talk about masking versus authenticity, because I'm autistic, and that was a really interesting lens for me to explore this idea, because I'm a high masking individual, but that might have its pluses in some ways. Maybe I'm able to navigate spaces that aren't made for people like me, because I can seem like not me, but that has consequences. High masking for a long time means your needs aren't met. You can end up getting diseases, because we now know, when we read The Body Keeps Score and that school of thought, that anything that you kind of like, that lack of self-expression or that internalized emotions that you don't kind of deal with, can actually manifest in diseases and etc. So you might see that women get more chronic diseases because we have a culture phenomenon that doesn't allow them to express themselves. So you might be other than that way, and actually if you apply that idea, it might harm you. So by me exploring like this paradigm of an idea, the spectrum of it, so let's say masking versus authenticity for this example, I'm able to explore that masking might have its benefits. You might feel safer because you can be below the parapet, no one sees you, you can kind of fit in, but it has a consequence as well. And like, let's look at it. Let's explore examples, let's explore the science of it, let's explore how it affects your biology, your health, your well-being, like, so you can make a considered decision if you choose to use that tool. But let's also talk about authenticity. We have a society that values authenticity in this real radical way now. But then how does that work? For example, let's say you're in a workplace that speaks about psychological safety, but actually isn't psychologically safe, and you share, and the people don't have the tools or emotional bandwidth to contain that or receive that, or even like be human with you because your frameworks are different and they don't know what to do with someone who isn't like them because you're not masking anymore. That might put you in a position where you have a lot of harm done to you and you leave with a lot of trauma. And I think if you go back to the example of autism and masking, you know, we're a demographic that have a very high unaliving rate. So that could have really quite extreme consequences for you as an individual. So I want to explore these ideas so that you don't fall prey to the ideas that I fell prey to. I took one philosophy at an extreme in a way that maybe would lead to some success, but actually not thriving, surviving. Cycles of seeming successful but burning out and being sick consistently and having no needs met. So superficially successful, because I want people to have real success that comes with that peace of mind and that health and well-being, because, you know, health is everything. So that's kind of what I kind of talk about and explore in my book through lots of different paradigms, where I explore spectrums of an idea, and each kind of chapter ends with some questions, some coaching questions, because you all know I love coaching. If you've been here for a little while, I'm always talking about coaching as a powerful tool to change your life and to really help you understand what you want, how to get it, and, you know, how to live a life that's aligned with you, because there's so much noise in our world. You know, they're trying to sell you something, market you with something, that often you can be living a life that's just nothing that you want. And even on those days where you hit those milestones that people say, yes, you're winning, you know it feels like nothing because it's not you. And I want people to kind of live that life that's coming from them, from their internal compass. So all through the book, I kind of ask you these incredible coaching questions to help you figure out what your compass is, and to kind of explore these ideas and figure out when you want to use them and when you don't want to use them, so that you can thrive in your life and you can be conscious why you're making decisions you're making, you know, so you know what the consequences of them are. And maybe you say, okay, I'm going to do this thing for this duration, for this outcome, and the boundaries of that is, if XYZ happens, I don't do this anymore. And, you know, I'm very conscious, I'm powerful in this because I'm deciding this, because I don't want to tell you not to do things. Like, I remember very early on in my life when I met people who were the extreme of that, of the idea that I grew up with, which is, you know, you're the common denominator in your life. They took the other extreme, that you're weak because the system's not for you and they're subjugating you and you're powerless. And that didn't help either. And actually it was probably more harmful in some ways, because it took all autonomy away. And, you know, also we kind of pushed the idea that, well, you can't control anything, everything's unfair. And of course that could be a fact, but then what am I meant to do with that? How am I meant to navigate a system with this truth? And I think with any truth, you need to figure out how you navigate the system with it. And that's kind of what we explore in this book. You know, what are all these ideas? How do you navigate the world with these ideas as whatever divergent person you are, as whatever thing that makes you feel othered, and experience the world in a way that makes you realize it wasn't built for you, but also with a way that makes you feel empowered, safe, full of love and joy and peace, and you can have your health and well-being and you can truly thrive. Because that's what I want. I want a world where everyone can be their best self, realize potential and live happily. You know, and I don't think that's impossible. I think with the tools like coaching and being able to make conscious decisions, even in broken systems, we can manage the systems, and until the systems can change, you know, maybe we can all collectively, you know, do these journeys and go on our hero's journeys and figure out what our shadow is, and do that inner work and take that radical responsibility to the levels that are safe, like we'll explore in the book for you. Then we can change the world. But till then, I want people to live and be safe within the systems we exist in. And that's kind of what I try and explore in this book. You know, how do we be safe? How do we thrive? How do we win? How do we feel good? And how do we have autonomy as a person still? So yeah, I haven't finished writing the book. And I think actually when I reflect on this kind of last season, when I got a bit sick, I realised something really important, that, you know, something that I think my personal trainer first told me. He said, wisdom are healed wounds. And sometimes you need to go through a bit more stuff. Like sometimes there's like a wisdom it needs to heal first entirely for you to be able to articulate the idea. And maybe that's been part of the journey of like finishing the book, and also I guess something my book agent told me, said you can only share from the wound, not the scar. You know, you can't be bleeding actively and like on like the battlefield of life. You have to have like bandaged up, healed, and be able to share from that perspective. So hopefully I'm getting that, and I can kind of complete the book and share from that perspective with you all. And I can't wait for you to read my book. You know, 2025, I'm going to get this done. I'm going to share it with you because I think it's deeply important, and it's never felt more important this time in history.